Gentlemen, again, welcome. It's nice to see you and look forward to a special evening with everyone. Again, welcome. It's so nice to see you with us this evening. And I think it's a great way to start off March Madness with a special session with all of you, introducing Pesach and also with a special guest speaker with us this evening. You know, as I was thinking about this evening and the subject that our guest Billy Baker is going to address, which is the subject of friendship and alienation that so many men have, I realized that here we are. He's been working on this subject for the last 3 to 4 years, and has a wonderful book on this subject. And this and many of us would define one of the most significant expressions of the past year of enduring the pandemic is in fact isolation, and how special it is that we have Billy Baker with us this evening, who has really explored that subject from a number of different points of view, but especially as we'll be focusing on the value of friendship for men. So I want to extend a very special welcome to Billy, who is a graduate of the Boston Latin School, Tulane University, and the Columbia Journalism School. Directed towards this subject by an editor a few years ago, and the subject evolved into a book entitled We Need to Hang Out, a memoir of making friends. If some of you may have had a chance to read an article or two or three that Billy has written, perhaps on this subject or something else, you will readily identify him as a very special writer who is able to add humor to some difficult subjects from time to time. And in fact, I neglected to mention that he was a member of the Boston Globe team that was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for the coverage of the Boston Marathon bombings. So indeed, he's a very talented writer and a wonderful curator of human emotions and the social fabric that defines us. So Billy, it's a pleasure to welcome you to Anshai Torah, to our men's event in basically a week. We will all be celebrating Passover, and we have established this tradition of a number of years ago of bringing the men together. The women met last night, to deepen our sensitivities and develop some insights that we might share at our dinner tables during the course of the first 2 nights of Passover. So thank you for introducing yourself to us and giving us an opportunity to appreciate some of the work that you've been doing.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm not gonna lie, I was a little, I had no idea what to expect, but just looking at the faces on this screen, this looks like a group of guys who will have no problem interjecting and busting my balls if I get out of line. So please bring it if you feel the need. Yeah, I guess I should explain why I'm sitting here talking about this topic. And first of all, I should explain I am in my in-laws' basement. So I apologize for the unused weight bench and other things behind me. But yeah, so 4 years ago, I got conned into an editor's office with one of the oldest lies in journalism, which is we have a story we think you'd be perfect for. And when I sat down and looked across the desk at the editor, he said, "We want you to write about how middle-aged men have no friends." And so in this moment, I'm having an existential crisis trying to figure out why I'm perfect for this story. And also, am I middle-aged? The editor is rattling off all these dire statistics about how we are apparently caught up in some loneliness epidemic. It disproportionately affects men, and it is something that men don't want to talk about. And it wasn't just that there was this statistical epidemic going on. The scariest part was all these health consequences. He's rattling off basically everything you don't want to get: cancer, diabetes, obesity, whatever it is. And in all of these instances, having a poor social life will dramatically increase your chances of getting these diseases and dying. And so none of it is making sense in my head. And all I can think of in this moment is, how am I going to get out of this article? And so, in the short time it took me to walk back to my desk, the easiest thing was for me to rationalize in my brain how I'm not the perfect person to write about how I have no friends. And very quickly, just kind of doing that thought experiment in my head where I'm thinking, oh, there's my buddy Mark, and I see him all, and it's like, how often do I see him? Maybe 3 or 4 times a year, maybe not so much. And then my other buddy Rory, and like, has it been a year since I've seen Rory? It might be possible. And I start to feel like I'm sadly typical. I'm the middle-aged dad with, a wife and young kids and a career and all these things. And, every day when I woke up, I had this list of priorities, and nowhere on that list was friendship. Friendship felt like something I did when the important stuff was done, and the important stuff was never done. So I reluctantly take on this article, talk to a lot of experts, stuff in the relevant statistics, all the health data, all these things. And when it comes time to actually write it, it was like, what is it they want from me? They want me to just raise my hand and admit I've allowed myself to slide into the being like a bit of a middle-aged loser? Like, fine. All right, I'll raise my hand. It happened. I don't know how it happened. I write the article, and that's when the weirdest thing happened in my career. So this article publishes, and within a few days, it had become the most popular article in the history of the Boston Globe. And this is an article about how middle-aged men have no friends. I've written many articles I'm very proud of, many that I thought would be like smash hits, and no one read them. And all of a sudden, this article that had this kind of drab title, it said something like, the biggest threat facing middle-aged men is not smoking or obesity, it's loneliness. Way too wordy. I don't know how it caught on, but next thing you know, I'm at the center of this conversation that apparently had been waiting to happen. And all of a sudden, I'm the guy who's on NPR. I'm the guy, being dragged out to be like everyone's favorite middle-aged loser. And I didn't want to be that guy. Like, I didn't even want to write the article. And so this train is running away from me. I'm being asked to like basically be the spokesman for an issue I didn't even want to admit I was a part of. And immediately everyone's like, wanted me to turn this into a book. And it was like, all I want to do is like, I'm very selfish. I just want to solve my own problems. So I set off on this quest essentially where it was like, all right, if I'm going to write a book, I'm not going to write about loneliness. I mean, that's the topic that clears the room. To this day, it's not something I even feel comfortable admitting that I was lonely, even though by all measurable standards, I was a card-carrying member of this epidemic. I had, I had a great family life, but I really didn't have any like confidants. I didn't have any active friendships, really. I had moved not too far from where I grew up. I grew up in Boston, but I'd moved about an hour away, and I knew people. I knew some other dads. I'd see guys at the gym or on the sidelines of a kid's sporting event or whatever it might be, but I just didn't, I didn't have active membership in a squad, in a tribe. And so the first thing I did, so I commit to writing a book. Terrible idea, but now I'm locked in. I've got to figure out how to solve this problem, for me at least, and see if by doing so it can be relatable to others. So I set off sort of in two ways. First thing I did was try and get the bands back together. I tried to fix my relationships. And while this was going on, I was studying the topic of friendship and the topic of loneliness. I'm talking to experts. I'm doing, various things. I kept hearing immediately that women were better at friendship than men. And that was something that kind of, it was stated as fact. And I was trying to figure out like why. I've stared at women my whole life being friends with their friends. It was like, what are they doing that we are not doing? And so there was something I learned writing the initial article that was really like telling to me. And the first time I heard it, it kind of made me stare off into space and nod my head because I could see it everywhere. And so sociologists do this thing called, they're called photo studies. And they basically creep around and take photos of us interacting without us knowing, and then they analyze them for patterns. And when you look at men and women, there is a very clear difference in the way we interact. And that is, women talk face to face and men talk shoulder to shoulder. And so once I heard that, all of a sudden I could see it, it was like box seats and bar stools, and everything's kind of designed in that way. And when we, when you look at the studies, and I look at my own life, where did I make my best friends? It was in doing something together. Men bond over an activity. Women were much more able to, especially as we get older in life, and there's the potential to lose contact with friends, they're much more able to keep contact with friends over the phone. They're much more able to sort of have these sort of intimate talks where they get a real deep connection. Whereas for guys, like for me, when I was looking at like what was working in my life, what had worked, it was always like, oh, we were best friends then because we were doing that thing together, but we're not doing that thing together anymore. So I don't even know what that guy's up to, So my initial thing was, all right, I'm going to try and get the bands back together. I'm going to try and hack the system, basically use the science of loneliness and the science of friendship to try and fix my own life. And it went great. Like I tried some gimmicky things. I tried to bring back, I was doing all these like sort of naive thought experiments. One of them was, what was the best day I had in high school? And for me, it was senior skip day. That day when we're all of a sudden, everyone's like, we're all cutting, right? We're all going to, go somewhere and screw over the teachers, whatever. I now realize as an adult, the teachers don't really care, right? So I brought back senior skip day. I got about 40 people to actually skip out of life on a Friday. It was quite fun, I tried to bring back another kind of reunion night, which was the night before Thanksgiving. I don't know if that was a thing in your life, but when I went off to college, that became kind of the unofficial, everyone's back in town to study women. I went on the New Kids on the Block cruise. I got very obsessed with the idea of going on a girls trip. It's always held up as this pinnacle of American friendship, this thing that women do and guys don't. And, we go away for guys' weekends, but the way a women's trip, a girls' trip's always portrayed as this sort of intimate bonding thing. But if I showed up, if there was a dude there, it wouldn't be a girls' trip. So I found out that the New Kids on the Block do this annual cruise, and no one would care that I was there. There were 4,000 middle-aged women there to see these 5 guys, and I was not one of those 5 guys. So I tried all these things, and ultimately I made some inroads in my past, but then it got to the point where I took a leave from my job to work on the book. And, as I'd sit there at my computer staring out the window, the fact remained that I just didn't have anyone to hang out with on a Wednesday night. And I say Wednesday night because when I was first starting on this journey, one of the first things I thought of was I'd met an older guy in this town I'd moved to. And at one point he said something to me where, oh, I can't do that. I have Wednesday night. And it was like, I'm not sure what you're saying. Don't we all have Wednesday night? And he said, oh, no. Wednesday night's this pact I made with some buddies years ago. And on Wednesday night, we get together. And at the time I heard it, I thought, oh, that's sweet. That's something I'll file away and maybe steal that when I'm older, when I need it. This article, this journey made me realize that I needed it. And after years of working on this book, years of working on my friendships, I still didn't have anyone to hang out with on a Wednesday night. And so what I realized was that I needed to build a new squad. I needed to build a new tribe. I needed to make new friends. And that, as an adult, is like the most awkward thing in the world to do. I mean, you've all felt it when someone's like coming on a little strong and, really like following through. I think it's easy for men to get to that point where, we're not accustomed to being vulnerable. It's something in some ways you're not raised to be, and to try and make new friendships is a thing where you're trying to put yourself, or you are putting yourself in a vulnerable position. So what I ultimately did was take this big swing where it was like, you know what, I'm going to try and steal this Wednesday night idea. And I'd also been heavily influenced by this idea that I'd heard about when I first wrote the article, and it went viral and it became very popular. And I should add this kind of a funny tidbit. It was eventually unseated as the most popular article in the history of the Boston Globe by an article that was titled, "Here's What Tom Brady Eats in a Typical Day." So there's no competing with that. So so what I did was, I took this big swing. It was like, what I'm ultimately missing is like, when I think of the periods of my life when I felt like I had an intimate connection, I had people that had my back. It was things like sports teams and, college. I was in a fraternity, these sort of dumb constructed things, but like it gave us a reason to feel relevant to each other, to feel necessary. And so, so when I first wrote the article, it went viral in two very weird places. One of them was Alberta, Canada. I still don't know why, but the other was Australia. It was all over the place in Australia. I don't know how a Boston Globe article all of a sudden went viral in Australia, but a lot of Australian men wrote to me about this thing called the men's sheds. And a men's shed is exactly what it sounds like. It is a shed where guys go and gather. There's more than, so the way it started was there was an older guy in Australia at a senior center. One day he just does a fit, like a classic old guy fit. And he's yelling at the woman that runs the place and says, "All the activities you have here are for women. It's knitting, it's bingo. Like the guys just need a place to hang out. That's what men need." He had this slogan: men need somewhere to go, something to do, and someone to talk to. So he said, "We're going out back. I'm taking that shed that nobody uses. I'm cleaning it out. That's for the guys. That's where we're going. You leave us alone." Next thing you knew, there were 1,000 of these things in Australia. And there are now 1,000 in Europe. And before COVID hit, they were opening at the rate of about one per day somewhere in the world. The simplest, dumbest guy idea in the world, right? Like, we just need a place. We need, like, and you look around, we know these places, right? They're the common room in the dorm you took over, or your friend's basement, or whatever it might be. You just kind of need the boy clubhouse. This is for older men. So I had this idea that, all right, I'm going to combine this Wednesday night idea I'm stealing from these guys in my town with this kind of men's shed thing. I found a guy who let us use his barn. I send out invitations to 12 guys. Some I knew pretty well, some I had only met once or twice, and it feels sort of awkward to even say, but the only thing I had in common with all these men was that at some point I felt like a spark with them, and that's something we usually reserve for romantic terms. And again, this is me being vulnerable, but you know what? Like, there was some moment where I was like, I like this person. I think they like me. And we'd all probably shared that moment where we go, "Oh, we should get a beer." Say, "Oh yeah, trying to schedule anything we know is a nightmare." So one of the other things I'd learned originally in this journey is that psychologists, psychiatrists that counsel people on things like this is you want to find something regular. Like, if you're in that, if you have something that's working, I'll bet you it's something like that weekly poker night or the bowling game, or the things you guys do in this group, whatever it might be. If it's regular, it's on the calendar, life works around it. So I combine these things. I invite a dozen guys, tell them to meet me at this barn on this night. And then I sat there, and it was the most awkward night of my life. Just sitting there like, is anyone going to come? I'm just like panicked. I felt like a little kid again. Like, I just needed some friends. And sure enough, all 12 of them showed up. I give this long rambling speech where I tell them a little bit of what I just told you here, or not a little bit, probably 10 times as much. I was like nervous. I was having that mouth diarrhea. Everything's coming out. I tell them the whole thing, tell them my plan, tell them why I invited them. Hope basically we can all start a little, boys club here. And then it got silent, and they gave me a round of applause. And so that moment, there have been many moments on this journey where I realized that simply by raising my hand and saying, "This is a thing affecting me," many people are able to relate to it. And I never wanted to be the guy on NPR talking about male loneliness. Wasn't my dream in life. And that's what happened to me. This journey has been the best gift I've ever given myself. It's forced me to be active and intentional about my friendships. I'm now like in the good position of getting yelled at by my wife on the regular for spending too much time with my friends. And the book has come out. It's hopefully, you know, sort of humorous and self-deprecating, and I want to make it okay to kind of blame me and then make you maybe take a little bit of action, maybe make you be a little bit more intentional about your friendships. Maybe after the Zoom call, you kind of think of that person they haven't seen forever, and you know what, you do care about them, and you reach out, and next thing you know, things are happening. But if you want to live a healthy, happy life, the things we've been told will help us. We've been misinformed by the misinformed. It really, the people that have the healthiest, happiest lives are the people that have a good friendship circle. And it's not even your family circle, it's outside of that. I still can't believe this is true, but if you don't want to see the doctor, see your friends. It's a fact. And so I'm the awkward guy who has to appear in front of Zoom things like this because there is no such thing as a book reading nowadays, and stare at faces of guys like you and wonder if, you know, you're feeling this way, if this is relevant in any way. I mean, good on you for having this group right here, but yeah, I still have a hard time believing that all I need to do is like go fart around and be a juvenile with my guy friends, and that's going to make me happier and healthier. But you know, it's years on in this journey for me, and I feel like a completely different person than I was at the beginning. So um that's the gist of my story. I know that I was supposed to talk for a little bit and then open up for questions. I'm not an expert on this. The truth is we're all experts on this. So if it's not a question, I'd like to hear what works for you, what's missing for you, whatever it might be, if any of this feels relatable in any way. But yeah. Does anyone? So that now I feel like the awkward moment when I gave a speech to all these guys in a barn. So if you don't want to give me a round of applause, I'd like you to ask some questions because.
Well, Billy,
Yes.
I'll be the first one to ask a question. First of all, I'll give you a round of applause on behalf of
Yeah,
all
no,
of us.
I don't know how to end things. I have a terrible ending to my book. I'll just spoil it.
No, thank you for spending some time with us this evening. And I must share with everybody that I heard Billy on NPR and being interviewed, and I was very intrigued by your message, and felt that we men need to hear your message. And really, my question to you is, this subject and similar subjects that sort of probe our personalities, our psyches, um, to continue what you've been saying to us, in general, women are better going there than men are.
Right.
How do you have any suggestions? How do you break through and enable men to begin to acknowledge what you're talking about, and then to pursue some of the various directions that will lead us where clearly there are proven out outgrowths?
So it's tricky because I feel like sometimes I sound like I'm saying we should all get together and talk about our feelings. And, you know, that's not what I'm saying. Like, I want to get together with my guy friends and create that space where sometimes, like, that is what comes up. So there's this big thing in male friendship that you're almost not supposed to talk about. So when I was doing all this research, I was so glad to find that, you know, I'd talk to psychiatrists and psychologists and all this, and they would all say, you know, and of course there's the problem of getting called gay, right? And there's this like middle school thing where anytime men start to get intimate, you know, in this way where, you know, you're sharing something honest or emotional, there's this fear of being called like gay or whatever. And it's like well documented. It's very damaging. I don't know how to get past that other than like I write about it in the book almost to just show how silly that is, because it's not being used, other than being wildly insulting to gay people, it's not being used to say that you're being gay. It's often it's used in a context to say like you're acting like a girl here. And the truth is in those moments, like that's when we should be stealing from the girls. Like that's where that's the stuff, that the magical sauce that they have that we don't have. But women are fundamentally different. So I don't, I know this, like for me, it has always been what's worked is simply getting together and then hoping something good comes of it. Like a friend of mine said something wonderful, that he plays golf with his friends because golf's just something to do with their hands while they then talk about what's happening back at home and whatever. So I don't know if that answers your question. The truth is, like, it's an awkward position I've landed in. I wrote a memoir rather than a sort of, self-help book, because it's like I can only say what I tried, what failed for me, what didn't fail. But like, during COVID, my little Wednesday night crew has essentially become a fire pit crew, because it's one of the few things you can kind of do safely. We all sit around the fire, and most nights that go by, like, I mean, all we do is like prove that we're all pyromaniacs. We're building a fire so big, like someone's going to call the fire department on us. But it's not every night that like some magic happens. But when you need it, like a friend of crew texted me today saying that one of his best friends that he was hoping to reconnect with and had actually sent a copy of my book to just told him he had cancer, and he feels like that was like just the fact they had reconnected meant this guy immediately reached out to him. And so like there's something about just connecting and staying connected that allows for, hopefully, when it gets real or when you need to be intimate or honest with someone, that there's someone there that to reach out to. So there's something I reference in the book. There's this long-term study that Harvard University has been doing. They started studying a class in, I think it was the 40s. John F. Kennedy was a member of this class, as was Ben Bradley, who was the editor of the Washington Post. So whenever they would have been at Harvard, the 30s and 40s. Anyway, they studied them long term, and they found the people that seem to have the most success in terms of their mental and physical health and their happiness were people who had an answer to the question, do you have someone to call in the middle of the night if you're sick or afraid? And so by staying connected, it's that simple. If you have an answer to that question, you are more likely to succeed in life. And so I feel like, yeah, me reconnecting in so many ways, I now feel very blessed in that I have many people I could call in that moment.
Billy?
Yes.
So one of the things that came to my attention recently, I mean, within the last few years, some of my close friends, they call, why don't you ever contact me? We're not connecting. And I go, you email me jokes or stories 3 times a day. And I feel like we are connecting. But if you're not connecting, I feel like we're here, it's like you think you're part of that group, but you're not, because it's just an email that's just sent out to you with 16,000 other people. It's his group. And I think that's an issue too.
Yeah, I think that goes to sort of the biggest question of our time, which is like, what is social media doing to our relationships? Are we actually connected to someone because we see them on there? We might know what their children look like or whatever it might be. So I knew that was something I needed to address. Like, what is social media doing to us? And right now, social media, the studies about social media have kind of a chicken and the egg problem, where we know people that spend a lot of time on social media are measurably lonelier than people that don't. But there's no way of knowing if they're going there because they're lonely or if it's the social media that's making them lonely. So I ended up in sort of an inadvertent sort of first person experiment for 2 things that happened when I was at Yale University. I'd gone down there to spend some time with a woman who was teaching a class on happiness. And when they announced the class at Yale, it immediately became the most popular class in the history of the school. Nearly a quarter of all undergraduates enrolled in this class the first semester it was offered. And so the professor told me a lot of fascinating things, but one of them was that at some point she mentioned in class that there were studies that showed the people that quit social media seemed to be measurably happier. A couple of the Yale students, being the sort of type A super student kids, thought she was saying that as if it was an assignment. So they quit social media. And a few weeks later, they were like, hey, when are we being tested on this or whatever? And she said, oh, no, that was just something I was talking about in class. Well, while I have you, how do you feel? And each one of them, to a person, reported they felt much better about their mental health, but also about their friendships. So that happened. And then also while I was at Yale, I was just talking to an undergraduate student, and the topic, they were all about to graduate. It was near the end of the semester, and they were talking about seeing each other at the reunion. And one friend said, well, reunions are irrelevant nowadays. We have social media, you know, we don't need to get together to catch up. Something about hearing him say that just made me so sad. You know, it's like, it is kind of true, isn't it? Right? Like we have this surface level connection through social media, if you're on social media, or it might be that, like, you know, the friend that emails you the jokes or whatever it is, there's this sort of loose connection, which is important, but is it as important as a face-to-face thing? So the only way I could answer this question was to answer it from myself. And I quit social media, and I immediately felt better about everyone. I wasn't like mad at people for tiny little things, like some political opinion they shared or something that just didn't land right with me. And it also meant when I saw my friends, I had to catch up. You know, like when I saw someone, we had to actually go through that, what feels like an ancient tradition now, of getting together, talking about life. How's your family? How's your dad? Whatever it might be. And so these things, like you'd raise, you know, like, is it enough when a friend, you know, sends you 5, you know, jokes a day? Is that really being together? Or, I think it depends on the person, the friendship. But I mean, I think we all know, like right now, I mean, I'm sure all of you would rather be doing this face to face than on Zoom, you know? So I think another big question of this time is like, what is COVID doing? You know, I don't have the answer to that. It certainly has created the most measurably lonely period in human history. You know, like, I mean, the entire world got forced apart. I'm naively hoping that this means we're about to enter a golden age of friendship when we all, can get back together again. But yeah, I am a big advocate for face-to-face contact, and hopefully pretty soon that will be able to return to normal. Anyone else? You're all guys. You all have friends and friendship problems, right?
So I had a question. Do you
Yeah.
think that it's a little bit age related? I always found that I always had very contextual friendships with my friends, and it wasn't so much of we'd have deep conversations all the time. That evolved as we got older. It most notably struck me. It was when I was very early in my marriage. One of the things that I always did with my close friends, we had a hockey game that went from monthly to a couple of times a year to once a year. And I came back and my wife says, "Hey, Andy, how's Evan, my college roommate?" And I said, "He's great." "Well, what do you have to say?" And I was like, he said, "I'm open. Pass me the puck." Like, and that was enough. Like, to me, I hadn't considered that wasn't really visiting with him. So I actually had to rethink that and realize that, like, hey, if he's like one of my closest friends in the whole world, like, the pizza after the game is going to have to be a little bit more substantive than, hey, that was a cool shot. And we actually consciously and subconsciously worked on that and maintained these long distance and semi-annual get-togethers to become that way. But it wasn't obvious from the beginning that was required.
Yeah, I keep hearing. So I think I've heard from as many women as men about this sort of whole topic, and I hear a lot from wives, this sort of complaint that, like, my husband will get together with his friends, they'll come home, and I'll be like, "Hey, how's so and so's dad doing? You know, doesn't he have cancer?" And you're like, "I don't know, we didn't talk about it," right? And it's like, and again, that's why it's like I worry that I'm like being painted as the like when I get, you know, I appear on a lot of radio shows and stuff. It's like, they introduce me as a guy who really wants men to have intimate relationships. And it's like, I'm kind of like a jokey, so, you know, like, but the thing is, like, when it needs to get real, I want to know that there are people around that I can go to. And I also want them to know that they can come to me. So I think men and women are fundamentally different in that way. I don't know if anyone saw the comedian John Mulaney hosted Saturday Night Live recently, and his entire like opening monologue was about how men have no friends. I think he stole my whole shtick, but he does this really funny joke, which is that it's dads don't have friends, moms have friends, and those friends have husbands, right? And it's like, you know, it goes to the truth that like women are just sort of better at having these sort of real talks, you know, and And men, I mean, they're, the data supports we bond, we make our closest friends doing activities, like I don't know about when I first started on this journey, and I was thinking like, what am I comfortable with? What am I not comfortable with? What I want to do with my friends? What am I missing? Like, I realized that I would always get uncomfortable when someone would say, hey, we should get some coffee. And I don't know why, I just didn't want to sit across the table from a guy, and because it was like, so then what do we get? We're just gonna sit and talk about our feelings. But like, if that same guy said, hey, will you come help me move a couch? I'd be there at like 6 a.m. Like, or will you come help me chop down this tree in my yard? And that may be like, I mean, just my issues, or it's a male thing, but like, yeah, what you're saying, like, yeah, I am still to this day, I'm labeled as some friendship expert, but I'll go hang out with my friends and come home with no relevant details of their life.
Because the difference is, if a woman would ask a man, what did you do? We can tell them. If they ask us, what did we talk about? We didn't talk about anything.
Yeah.
It's different than if you ask a woman, what did you talk about? They talked about a bunch of stuff. We fished, we drank beer, we can tell what we did. And then there are a few relationships that we can tell them we talked about, but that's just a few, right? I mean, it's our really close friends. The rest is what we did, I think.
Yeah. And I don't know about you guys, like I kind of, if I got like one criticism on the book, is that I didn't focus on male-female friendships. And I mentioned the book, and I give this answer when asked about it. And it's because like, I feel like a lot of my deepest friendships are with women, because when I'm talking to women, it feels like it can be different, or maybe they are better at leading the conversation in a way where like they're going to lead off by asking, how's your dad's cancer, whatever it might be, like,
and they listen better.
Yeah. And I also feel in this weird way of like shoulder to shoulder and face to face, I feel like I can talk to a woman in making eye contact. Whereas with guys, like this shoulder to shoulder thing, it blows my mind. But there will be times where I'll notice I'm sitting across the table from a guy, and I realize we've both turned our chairs and we're like facing away from each other. We've moved our shoulders to be directly on. And I just don't know. I mean, there are these. I did a lot of, I got kind of really into this idea of like, where in the evolutionary train did like men get bad and women get good? And there's this crazy thing that happened with women's hips. So when humans became bipedal and we got these big brains, like to support this big brain on an upright animal, we had to change the scaffolding of our body. And one of the things we had to do was make our hips narrower. If you picture like a great ape or something, right? They have these giant rear ends, right? And they're like way up in the air. So you get these narrow hips, and that is terrible for childbirth, right? So like trying to get a increasingly large human head out of an increasingly narrow pelvis is a nightmare. So humans, females, end up evolving to the point where they're essentially giving birth premature compared to other animals in the wild. Like a human baby comes out and it is useless. I mean, some of them live at home into their 30s, right? Like they just need constant care, right? And so women had to become, to survive, they had to become good at being social. They needed like the village, they needed help to keep this child alive. Whereas the men in this sort of, hunter-gatherer sense or whatever, we're off, shooting things in the woods. And I've been hunting once in my life, but all I can tell you is that you're just supposed to sit out there and say nothing, right? Like you're supposed to be dead quiet. So, like, I think we just went down these two very different tracks, and women, you play that out to present day, and they seem to be better and more intimate and more face-to-face than we are.
Well, I'm glad you're bringing us back down the right path.
Let's hope. Yeah. So, yeah.
I have a question. Do men get better at friendships later in life?
So what seems to hold true is that men are very good at friendship, like in the years, up until their 20s, and then they seem to get better again on the tail end when a retirement happens and things like that. or or and this is all sort of mostly anecdotal. There is some data on it, but or the exact opposite happens, where you kind of lose your work connections. You've lost maybe the other dads, or from the sports games or whatever it might be. So so my own dad is in his 70s. He retired a year ago, and I'm the pain in the butt son that's like, hey, you got to do you want me to help you start a men's shed or whatever? And he's like, oh, I'm fine. I got I go there, like, don't worry about me. But my mom, meanwhile, seems to be like thriving, like having dinner with the girls every night, doing these things. So the data seems to indicate that there is a sort of this trough in middle age, and then it gets better again. But of course, everything I'm saying here is a generalization. Each, it's an individual story. But
I could tell you the work. I'm having that right now, planning on my retirement, because I've been with the same group of mostly guys for the last 20, 25 years. And we usually have a good time at work, and that's going to end pretty soon. So
yeah,
I'm wrestling with that issue right now.
Well, could I ask you, and this is another interesting topic, do you consider the people you work with to be your friends or your colleagues?
I consider about 3 or 4 of them to be my friends.
Okay, so you would actually
we normally do not socialize outside of the office unless we go to a convention together or have a firm function. But still, I mean, 2 of them I've known for almost 50 years. We went to school together. Okay. So that's the dividing line, I guess.
So something interesting about male friendships, in that when you ask guys to name their best friends, we invariably name someone that we go way back with. Usually it's someone from like childhood or high school or maybe college, but there's this sort of cutoff. Even though the reality might be that you spend way more time with that guy you work with, or you sit next to and you talk to all the time and you fart around, about his kids and his family and his life. But there's some sort of wall there where we just don't think of that person as being, maybe we think of them as a friend, but we never think of them as like a best friend. Like, no, my best friend's this guy that I grew up with, that lived next door to me, that we had a treehouse together. And part of one of the things that was very revelatory on my journey was I heard this quote on a sitcom. I heard the actress Mindy Kaling say this thing. And she said, a best friend is not a person, a best friend is not a person, it's a tier. And so when I first heard that, I've got my ears up to anything involving friendship, and I really thought on it, which is bizarre for something in kind of a bad sitcom, but it felt freeing in a way where it was like, okay, so I can add new best friends. And I'm not insulting my best friends from the past. Like, they're still there. I'm just raising other people up onto this podium. And so that actually paved the way for me to feel like I went from having kind of like good work friends to like friends that I also happen to work with them, so there was something about that thing in general. But, of course, work is work, right? Like, there's a monetary basis to it. You feel that you can't cross certain lines. You might get dragged to HR. It's very much a tricky situation you need to navigate. You never know. There are assassins everywhere, right? So.
Right. Well, and the other issue is, of course, I haven't seen these people in a year.
Right.
It's funny you should talk. You mentioned friends from a long time ago. I have one friend that we've known each other since we were 5 years old, and we stay in pretty close communication. And I just reconnected with somebody that I've known since we were about 7 years old. And we usually get together once a month or once every 3 weeks, on FaceTime and talk. And hopefully at some point in time, we'll be able to visit each other.
Well, let me say this. Let me give you all some homework, which is, when this is done, I want you to close your eyes and think about someone that you missed, that you'd like to see more on the regular, and then call them up and say, I just listened to this dipshit drone on and on about friendship, and for some reason it made me think I should call you and we should hang out. And that's the first step. And this is the best stuff in life. Yeah, I don't know what more I have to add. I'm just a regular guy, just like all of you. I'm looking at all your faces. Come on, you all have the same issues and problems.
Billy, we're so happy we're not talking about what happened when Moses crossed the sea.
What is this? What does this group normally do?
Rabbi?
Sit around and drink.
I'm supposed to know what you guys do.
Usually alcohol.
We hang out.
Billy,
Yeah.
this is just men from the congregation. This isn't a group that necessarily is focused on some particular element or focus.
Okay.
So everybody has their own interests and activities, but we try to provide these kind of opportunities to bring everybody together periodically as members of the synagogue to address various subjects.
Okay.
And often alcohol is involved, and that's
Well, I'm jealous of that because my in-laws
Andy,
are all
I see.
drinking upstairs, and I was like, I got to talk to a synagogue group. I don't know what I thought it was going to
Get ready, have
Hey,
one
we
now. Go ahead.
We didn't send you the bourbon?
I'm drinking Diet Coke here. I mean, it's late on the East Coast. I'm having a tough time staying awake.
Andy Harmon right here makes J.R. Ewing bourbon, so really.
This has really been enjoyable because typically the subject matter is on the religion of what's going on in the past. It's typically something that is related to it. This is actually something very fun and different, and I'm so happy you're part of it.
Yeah.
Robert, keep going, Robert. You'll be out of the club in a minute.
I need one more drink.
Yeah.
So how do we relate this conversation to our current Jewish world and even our little Jewish community? Rabbis, plural?
Well, I think that Rabbi Krishnik was actually going to
There we go.
bring us back home, if you will, as I think we're getting kind of close to the end of our session. We didn't want to keep everybody too long this evening, but it's really been great. I mean, as I was sitting here listening to Howard, I wanted to ask you if maybe what you really need was a second round as president of the congregation.
I have nothing else better to do. Only if Andy will be first vice.
We could talk to Daniel after Dan Cohen after this and see.
We need to catch Dan on a good day.
That's right.
Day.
That's right. That's right.
All right, I'll share a quick word because I certainly got the hint from Robert that the least enjoyable part of this whole thing every year is listening to the rabbis speak. So, all right, Yom Kippur is in about 6 months, Robert. So no worries.
Rabbi Krishnik, we'll get them next year.
Exactly. It'll be 2
Can I
hours.
join your synagogue?
No worries, no worries. But I do want to just take a quick moment because we are going to sit down for a Seder in just over a week, one way or the other. And I found it fascinating as I was preparing for my Seder this year and reading some of the articles, knowing the subject that Billy was going to speak about. I never quite realized it this way, but the Seder begins the very beginning of the Magi, the section where we tell the story of our exodus from Egypt. And it begins with a text we know well, where we raise up and we say, Halach ma'anya di achalu, right? That this is the bread of affliction, which our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. This matzah, this flat bread that all of us don't really like eating. And we start with that. But really what comes right after that, I think is really telling. And I'll just read it in English for you. But Kol dichvin yateve achol, kol ditzrich yateve afseh. All who are hungry, come and eat. And then it continues. All who are in need, come and join this Passover gathering. And I'm going to come back to the last 2 lines in just a few moments. So that's how the entire Passover Seder, really, the storytelling begins. And then when you get to the very core, the essence of some way of what we're telling about our journey down to Egypt, became enslaved, it continues there and, really becomes this part. My father was a wandering Aramean. He went down to Egypt and he lived it. They were few in number. And what happens to them? They became a nation. They became a people. They became a community. And so here we have the essence, the beginning, and then the essence of our story is all about coming together with other people. And it really made me realize, we say this all the time. In every generation, we're supposed to see ourselves as we got ourselves out of Egypt, that we somehow set ourselves free. And Billy, as you were speaking this evening, I'm going to translate what you said, almost into like, what we're going to experience of our holiday of Passover is men are enslaved. We're trapped in this reality of what we have, the inability to form these deep relationships, as you were just talking about, that we need to find a way to become better at it, to move out of our comfort zones. And so the beginning, as I was saying, is, all who are hungry. I'm going to kind of translate this on the fly in a different way, right? All who are in need of relationships, come and be together. Anyone who's in need, anyone who needs that connection, come and join this gathering that we're having. This year we're here, maybe alone. Next year, instead of saying the land of Israel, next year, let's have our social worlds be full. Kind of that's the fulfillment of being in Israel, right? We're at the pinnacle. Let's have our social lives full. Now we're a slave. Now we're stuck in this moment of isolation. Perhaps we have a feeling of loneliness. Perhaps we don't have those relationships. Next year, may we be free. Next year, we're going to have those relationships with that person we can pick up the phone at 2 a.m. and call. And maybe they'll just be silly friendships, but every once in a while, hopefully they'll develop, as Billy was talking about, into something much more profound and deeper. So I don't want to take too long of the Jewish content, but I think what Billy was talking about fits perfectly into how the story of the Seder and the Haggadah, the text that we use for that, fit, that the beginning and the essence is all about coming together with other people. And in some ways, it's so telling. This is the holiday, again, this year may be a bit different as it was last year, that usually our living rooms, our tables are full of other people. Sometimes those are deep relationships, sometimes they're not. But as you sit around your table or your Zoom calls for Seder this year, I hope you find a chance to think about is how do we deepen those relationships and find ourselves more connected and less isolated as we move into this coming year. So thank you all.